welcome back to Tales from the Long Box. Today I'm trying something a little different. Instead of focusing on forgotten Marvel characters, I'm highlighting 3 Marvel villains I think are absolutely worth reading. These aren't necessarily the most famous villains, and they're not the ones that usually show up in top 10 lists, or even in major event stories, but they each have histories that are a lot more interesting than they first appeared. What I like about these kinds of characters is they sit in that middle space of Marvel, where continuity gets weird, writers take a different direction with them over the years, and you end up with stories that feel way more unpredictable than you'd expect. So in this video, I'm going through 3 of them. And if you've never really dug into their comics before, you're probably missing out on some of Marvel's better deep cuts. If we're talking about Marvel villains worth reading, I've got to start with Dr. Noah Black, better known as Centurius. He first showed up in 1968, created by Jim Steranko, and he had that classic Silver Age spy psychedelic energy right away. Later, Marvel expanded his backstory into something much bigger. Dr. Noah Black became a 1930s African-American geneticist whose intelligence put him on the same level as people like Arnim Zola and Herbert Wyndham before he became a high evolutionary. So this wasn't just some random mad scientist. This was someone who genuinely believed he was one of the smartest people in the Marvel Universe. And for a while, it might have been true. That belief eventually went completely off the rails. He reinvented himself as Centurius and isolated himself on Valhalla Island, where he built mutated life forms, hidden labs, and even an orbital space ark. His plan was basically to wipe out life on Earth and rebuild it from scratch using his own engineered designs. It probably would have gone a lot better if Nick Fury and Jimmy Woo hadn't accidentally crashed a plane into his operation, forcing everything into open conflict. Then you get one of those perfect Silver Age moments. He activated his greatest invention, the Evolutionizer, which is supposed to evolve him into a perfect godlike being. Instead, it catastrophically malfunctioned and turned him into a puddle of slime, right in front of Nick Fury and S.H.I.E.L.D. agents. All that genius, all that planning, just gone in seconds. Except not really, because Centurius is one of those characters who never stays finished. In the 70s, he somehow reconstructed himself back into human form and resurfaced, joining a group called the Conspiracy. He got pulled into conflict with Ulysses Bloodstone during a mission involving experimental evolutionary science and occult-adjacent technology. That storyline ended with Centurius being absorbed into a massive dimensional crystal structure, which immediately destabilized and exploded, leaving his fate unclear. For a while, Marvel basically treated that as the end of him. Captain America later discovered one of his abandoned facilities and found Centurius' skeleton still inside, basically confirming he was gone. But then he just came back anyway. No explanation, no big return story. He was suddenly alive again in modern continuity, locked in the Raft super prison, and escaped during the new Avengers breakout like it was nothing. From there, he slipped into the background of the Marvel underworld. He became tied to the Hood's criminal network, and for once he wasn't trying to destroy the world, he was operating inside it, offering scientific expertise to villains instead of leading the charge. One of his better modern appearances came in Jeff Parker's Thunderbolts era. Luke Cage assigned him to one of the beta teams with guys like Shocker and Boomerang, basically using him as the reluctant scientist of the group. Instead of being the mastermind, he became the guy trying to keep everything from falling apart. And surprisingly, it worked. That storyline got weird fast. Time travel, Camelot, Victorian London, Latveria, and through it all, Centurius ended up being one of the few people actually holding things together. At one point, he even helped stabilize reality with Scar's sword, which prevented a full timeline collapse. Which is kind of insane when you remember this is the same guy who once got reduced to slime in a lab accident. So, why is he worth reading? Because Centurius isn't just a villain with a strange Silver Age gimmick. He's a character Marvel keeps reinventing without fully ever deciding what he's supposed to be. If I were writing him today, I wouldn't make him another world-ending villain. I'd lead into the fact that he's been around since the 1930s, meaning he's had decades to watch science evolve in the Marvel Universe. So instead of a conqueror, I'd make him something quieter, a hidden scientific broker in the criminal underworld, the guy villains go to when AIM is too reckless and Hydra is too ideological. No apocalypse plan, no giant armies, just secret labs, impossible tech, and a reputation for solving problems nobody else can safely handle. That feels like a role Marvel could always use, and that's what makes him work way better than he should. Next up is Melvin Potter, better known as the Gladiator. If you watch the Netflix Daredevil series, you probably remember him as the anxious suit maker who worked on Matt Murdock's gear and occasionally lost control. But the comics version of Melvin was on a whole different story. Messier, more violent, and honestly a lot more interesting. He's one of those characters who could have stayed a goofy Silver Age villain forever. But over the years, Marvel kept peeling back the layers until he became one of Daredevil's most tragic supporting characters. He first showed up in 1966 as a talented but bitter costume designer in New York who felt completely overlooked. Instead of dealing with that in a normal way, he built himself a suit of armor with spinning buzzsaw gauntlets and decided robbing banks was a reasonable career choice. His first big moment came when Foggy Nelson wandered into his shop looking for a fake Daredevil costume and ended up getting knocked unconscious. The real Daredevil arrived, stopping him, and just like that, Melvin found his place in Marvel's growing roster of street-level villains. From there, he became one of those villains who seemed to pop up everywhere. He teamed up with the Masked Marauder, got put into Magia's schemes, and even joined Electro's Emissaries of Evil, which pretty much fell apart because no one could agree on who got to fight Daredevil first. Throughout the 70s, he bounced from one disaster to the next. He attacked Stark Industries alongside Madame Mask, and actually gave Iron Man a hard time. Tried and failed to fake insanity in court, hijacked planes and trains, and kept running into Daredevil in one bizarre situation after another. At one point, he was fighting Ghost Rider. At another, he crossed paths with the Man-Thing. His career was basically one long string of terrible decisions, but somehow he always managed to survive. The character really changed once the Purple Man got involved. After being manipulated and pushed even further over the edge, Melvin finally ended up in therapy with Betsy Beatty, who actually helped him put his life back together. For a while, he stopped being a villain altogether. He opened a legitimate costume shop, became a trusted friend to Matt Murdock without ever realizing he was Daredevil, and even helped heroes from time to time. During one storyline, he fought alongside Daredevil and Elektra against the Hand, and in another, armed robbers forced him back into the Gladiator armor, leading to a brutal fight with Spider-Man. As soon as he came back to his senses, though, he felt so guilty that he tried to make Spider-Man a new costume to make up for it. It's one of those weird little Marvel moments that's equally parts violent, yet strangely sweet. Unfortunately, being a Daredevil supporting character usually means happiness doesn't last. Melvin married Betsy, they eventually split, he remarried, had a daughter, and then everything unraveled again. He was blackmailed into attacking Daredevil, and later Mr. Fear shattered what was left of his mental stability through drugs and psychological torture. By the end of it, Melvin lost almost everything that allowed him to build a normal life, leaving him institutionalized and barely recognizable. That's why I think Gladiator is worth reading. On paper, he looks like another gimmicky Silver Age villain with buzzsaws on his wrist, but once you actually follow his story, he becomes one of Marvel's better redemption arcs. His biggest battles aren't against Daredevil, they're against his own mental illness, guilt, and the constant pull back towards violence. If Marvel brought him back in a bigger, meaningful way, I wouldn't have him putting the armor back on full time. I'd lead into what made him unique in the first place. He's one of the best armor and costume designers in the street-level Marvel universe. In a city full of vigilantes, gangs, and tech-enhanced criminals, Melvin works better as the guy everyone quietly goes to when they need equipment that actually works. Not a hero, not a villain, just a deeply troubled craftsman trying to stay out of the fight while making gear for the people who can't. That feels like a much more interesting place for the character. It's a role that plays to everything Marvel spent decades building with him, and it's exactly why I think Gladiator is a character more people should read. Next up is Marcus Daniels, better known as Blackout. He first appeared in Nova number 19 in 1978, and he's one of those characters who starts out as a fairly straightforward, experiment gone wrong villain, but slowly turns into something a lot more unstable than he should have ever become. He originally worked as a lab assistant to Dr. Abner Croy, who was studying a strange form of radiation he called Black Star rays. Croy ended up experimenting on Daniels against his will, bombarding him with energy that was later identified as the Darkforce. What that did was turn Daniels into a living conduit for an extra-dimensional energy field, basically giving him access to a dimension of living darkness he can pull into our world and shape. And that's where his powers get interesting. Blackout can take Darkforce energy and solidify it into physical matter. Not just blasts, actual structures. He can form walls, cages, platforms, weapons, and even entire enclosed spaces made out of dense, shadow-like material. He can also open portals directly into the Darkforce dimension itself, meaning he can send people into it, pull things out of it, or trap someone in a space that isn't really a part of reality anymore. Early on, Croy actually builds a stabilizing suit and device, just to keep Daniels from fully slipping into that dimension, because the connection is already that unstable. Daniels eventually escapes, takes the name Blackout, and starts using his powers for crime, but even then, it's clear his control isn't perfect. He goes back to Croy's lab to steal the stabilizer, and in the process, accidentally throws Croy into the Darkforce dimension, killing him. Not long after, he runs into Nova during one of his early appearances, and during that conflict, he ends up losing control entirely and gets pulled into the Darkforce dimension himself. That's the first major turning point for him, because the Darkforce dimension doesn't just give him power, it starts affecting his mind. Time spent there makes him unstable, more detached, and harder to control when he returns. Eventually he comes back to Earth, but he's not the same. He's captured and sent to Project Pegasus, where Marvel basically keeps dangerous energy-based individuals under study. While there, he gets caught up in a breakout involving other superhuman prisoners and teams up with Moonstone, who becomes the first person to actually stabilize his abilities and help him control the Darkforce more effectively. That leads into his time with Baron Zemo's Masters of Evil, but this is where things get darker. Zemo realizes how valuable Blackout's abilities are, and installs psychological and technological control over him, overriding Moonstone's influence. From that point on, stops being a villain with any real agency. He becomes a weapon that different leaders point at whatever needs to be erased. One of the biggest examples of this is the attack on the Avengers Mansion. Blackout is used to trap Captain Marvel inside the Darkforce dimension, then creates a massive Darkforce barrier around the entire mansion to isolate the Avengers. Eventually, Zemo orders him to send the whole mansion and everyone inside it into the Darkforce dimension completely. The mental strain of being controlled from multiple sides finally breaks him, and he resists long enough to realize what is happening before suffering a fatal cerebral hemorrhage and dying almost instantly. And that would normally be the end of him. Except it isn't. Years later, Zemo brings him back using the Kree-Life Stone, but he returns unstable, mentally broken, and still easily manipulated. From there, he's reused across multiple villain groups. Thunderbolts, Hood's criminal network, various Masters of Evil lineups, almost always as the raw power source for Darkforce-based attacks. At one point, he helps generate a full Darkforce dome over Manhattan, cutting off sunlight entirely as part of a larger takeover attempt. And later, during the Pleasant Hill storyline, he's even rewritten into a civilian identity named Bob Hofstetter, essentially brainwashed into thinking he's just an ordinary person before being pulled back into villainy once that system collapses. So, why is he worth reading? Because Blackout isn't really a character defined by choices anymore. He's defined by what his powers allow other people to do through him. And those powers are basically this. He can pull solid shadow matter from another dimension, shape it to anything simple or large scale, and open portals that erase people from normal reality entirely. And the more you look at his story, the more it becomes clear he's not really a mastermind villain or even a tragic anti-hero. He's something closer to a walking access point to a dangerous dimension that other people keep trying and failing to control. That's what makes Blackout interesting to me. Not what he is on his own, but how often everyone else loses control the moment he's involved. And that's what brings us to the end of today's video on the 3 Marvel villains I think are absolutely worth reading. What really stands out when you look at all 3 is how different they are on the surface, but how similar they become once you follow their stories. Centurius starts as a Silver Age science villain who keeps reinventing himself to the point where Marvel never fully locks down what he's supposed to be. Gladiator looks like a gimmick villain on paper, but ends up becoming one of Daredevil's most tragic supporting characters, stuck between violence and trying to build a normal life. And Blackout begins as an experiment gone wrong energy villain, only to turn into something closer to a walking doorway that other people keep using for their own goals, until there's almost nothing of him left in control. That's the kind of pattern with all 3 of them. None of them really stay in one place. They get rewritten, repurposed, or pulled in different directions over the years. And that what makes them interesting to go back and read now. They're not clean, they're definitely not consistent, and they're also not simple, but that's exactly why I think they work. And honestly, I think that's sometimes what makes these characters so much fun to dig into. They're the ones that you don't fit neatly into the best of list, but still end up sticking with you once you actually read their stories. If you enjoyed the video, do me a favor and hit that like button. Drop a comment and maybe subscribe to the channel. It really helps out. If you want to support the research that goes into this video, you can also check out the channel memberships. It helps directly support future videos And as a thank you, members get their names featured at the end of every upload. Thanks so much for watching, and as always, I'll catch you in the next one.